I apologized to my father for never repaying the emergency loan. He looked confused and said, "Your wife has been sending me payments for 4 years. The debt was settled last January." My father set down his coffee cup with a ceramic click that seemed to echo through his small kitchen. The afternoon sun was streaming through the window behind him, casting his face half in shadow, and I watched his expression shift from confusion to concern as my brain struggled to process what he had just said. I had driven 3 hours to have this conversation, rehearsing my apology the entire way, working up the courage to finally address the $25,000 I had borrowed during the worst year of my life and never managed to pay back. I had brought a check for $5,000 as a gesture of good faith, the beginning of a repayment plan I had finally scraped together after years of what I believed was grinding poverty. My father looked at the check in my hand, then back at my face, and repeated himself slowly, like he was talking to someone who didn't speak English. "Son, Meredith has been sending me $500 every month for 4 years. The last payment came in January. You don't owe me anything." My wife's name hung in the air between us, and I felt something cold settle into my chest, because Meredith and I had been barely surviving on my salary for years. We couldn't afford to fix the car. We couldn't afford summer camp for the kids. We couldn't afford the leak in the roof. We definitely couldn't afford $500 a month to anyone. I had been married to Meredith for 11 years when that conversation with my father happened. We met in graduate school at Northwestern, both of us pursuing MBAs with the desperate energy of people trying to outrun their working-class backgrounds. She was brilliant and driven, the kind of woman who color-coded her notes and knew exactly where she would be in 10 years. I was messier, more optimistic, the kind of person who believed things would work out if you just kept pushing forward. We balanced each other, or at least I thought we did. After graduation, she went into corporate finance while I took a riskier path in startup consulting. For a few years, we were doing well enough, buying a house in the suburbs outside Chicago, having 2 kids in quick succession, building what looked like a comfortable upper-middle-class life. Then my mother got sick. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that announces itself when it's already too late, and I spent most of 2019 flying back and forth to my parents' house in Ohio, watching her disappear by degrees. I missed client meetings. I missed deadlines. I missed the memo that my biggest client was moving on. By the time my mother died in February 2020, I had lost my consulting business, and we were hemorrhaging money. The loan from my father came at the worst possible moment and the only possible moment. He had just buried his wife of 42 years. He was 71 years old and living on a fixed income, and his only son was standing in his kitchen asking to borrow $25,000 to avoid losing the house. He didn't hesitate. He wrote the check from my mother's life insurance payout, money he should have been using to secure his own future, and pressed it into my hands with the quiet dignity of a man who had spent his whole life giving everything to his family. I promised him I would pay it back. I promised myself I would pay it back. And then the pandemic hit, and the world fell apart, and Meredith sat me down at our kitchen table in March 2020 and explained that we needed to be very careful with money going forward. She would handle the finances, she said. She was better with numbers. I was dealing with grief and job loss and 2 small children suddenly home from school. Let her carry this burden. Let her figure out how to keep us afloat. I was so grateful I almost cried. I handed over the checkbook, the credit cards, the login information for every account, and I didn't ask questions for 4 years. The red flags were there if I had been paying attention, but grief makes you stupid and trust makes you blind. Meredith started controlling all the money in small ways that seemed reasonable at first. She gave me an allowance for personal spending, which she explained was just good budgeting. She said no to things I wanted to buy, which seemed fair given our situation. She handled all the bills, all the accounts, all the financial planning, and she reported back to me in vague terms that made everything sound dire, but not hopeless. We were making it work, she said. We were surviving, but we couldn't afford extras. We couldn't afford vacations. We couldn't afford new clothes for the kids until their current ones were literally falling apart. When my son Eli wanted to join the travel soccer team, she showed me a spreadsheet proving we couldn't afford the fees. When the transmission on our Toyota started dying, she said we had to nurse it along because we couldn't afford a replacement. I got a new job in 2021, decent salary, nothing spectacular but enough that I thought we might be turning a corner. Meredith explained that we were still digging out of the hole, that we had credit card debt from the bad years, that we needed to be patient. I believed her because I had no reason not to, because she had always been the responsible one, because questioning her felt like questioning our entire marriage. My father's words sent me spiraling down a mental staircase that had no bottom. I sat in his kitchen for another hour, asking questions and getting answers that made less and less sense. He showed me his bank statements going back 4 years. Deposits of exactly $500 on the 15th of every month, starting in March 2020, the same month Meredith took over our finances. The transfers came from an account I didn't recognize, a Chase account ending in 4418. That wasn't any of the accounts I knew about. The memo line on each transfer said the same thing. Loan repayment, thank you, Dad. My father thought I knew. He thought I had set this up. He thought Meredith and I had worked out a repayment plan together, and she was just handling the logistics because I was too proud or too busy to deal with it directly. He had even called Meredith once, about a year into the payments, to thank her for being so responsible about it. She had told him it was no problem, that family helped family, that they would have the whole thing paid off within a few years. She had said we. She had implied I was part of this. She had lied to my father while stealing from me, and I didn't even know how much she had stolen yet. The $24,000 in loan payments was just the number I could see. The number I couldn't see was somewhere underneath it, waiting. I drove home from my father's house in a fog so thick I probably shouldn't have been on the road. My mind was racing through every financial decision of the past 4 years, every no Meredith had given me, every sacrifice I thought we were making together. The summer camp we couldn't afford, the car repairs we couldn't afford, the small pleasures and basic necessities she had denied us over and over, always with spreadsheets and budgets and the calm authority of someone who knew the numbers better than I did. Where had the money come from? Where had it gone? I kept my hands steady on the wheel and my face neutral when I walked through our front door at 7:30 that evening. Meredith was in the kitchen cleaning up from dinner, and she smiled at me with the easy warmth she always showed, the warmth I had always believed was real. "How's your dad doing?" she asked, and I made my voice light when I answered. "Fine. He's fine. We had a good visit." I went upstairs to check on the kids, kissing them goodnight, performing normalcy while my heart hammered against my ribs. Then I went to my home office, closed the door, and started looking for the truth. The first thing I did was try to log into our bank accounts, the ones I knew about. Meredith had changed the passwords at some point during the past 4 years, which she had explained as a security measure after some data breach I vaguely remembered. I requested password resets and watched my email for the confirmation links, but nothing came. The email addresses on the accounts had been changed too. I was locked out of my own financial life, and I felt the first real spike of panic pierce through the numbness. I spent the next 2 hours going through every drawer and file cabinet in the house, looking for paper statements, looking for anything that would tell me what was actually happening with our money. I found almost nothing. Meredith kept everything digital now, she had explained years ago, because it was more organized and better for the environment. The only financial documents in the house were a few old tax returns from before 2020 and a folder of pay stubs from my current job that I insisted on keeping. I photographed everything I could find, saved it to a cloud folder, and then I did something I had never done before in my marriage. I went through my wife's things. Her laptop was password protected, but I knew the password because she had told it to me years ago and never changed it. The irony of that trust would hit me later. I opened her email first, searching for anything related to Chase or banking or finances. What I found was a separate email account I had never seen before, automatically logged in through her browser. The address was meredith.private2019@gmail.com, mail to meredith.private2019@gmail.com, and the inbox contained 4 years of bank statements, credit card statements, and financial correspondence that painted a picture of a completely different life than the one I thought we were living. There were 2 bank accounts I didn't know existed. There were 3 credit cards in her name only. There was a brokerage account with $78,000 in it, money that had been accumulating slowly while she told me we couldn't afford soccer fees for our son. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the trackpad. I started downloading everything, every statement, every email, every piece of evidence I could find. At 11:47 that night, I found an email chain between Meredith and someone named Graham that made me stop breathing. The emails were intimate, planning, logistical. They were discussing a trip to Aspen they had taken together in January. They were discussing the apartment lease that was coming up for renewal. They were discussing us, my children, our family, like we were obstacles in the way of their real lives together. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat in my office with the door locked, downloading and organizing and trying to understand the scope of what my wife had done. The financial picture emerged slowly, like a photograph developing an acid. Meredith made $145,000 a year at her corporate finance job. I made $95,000 at mine. Together, that was $240,000 in annual household income, a comfortable amount by any reasonable standard. But according to the records I found, Meredith had been diverting roughly $4,000 per month away from our household for 4 years. That was $48,000 per year. That was $192,000 total. Some of it had gone to pay back my father, which I suppose she could try to frame as a good thing. Some of it had gone into her secret brokerage account, building a nest egg for whatever future she was planning without me. Some of it had gone to rent an apartment in the city, a 2-bedroom place in Lincoln Park that cost $2,800 per month. And some of it, judging by the credit card statements, had gone to fund a lifestyle she was living with Graham while I stayed home with our children and believed we were too poor to take a vacation. The next morning, I called in sick to work and waited for Meredith to leave for her office. As soon as her car was out of the driveway, I loaded the kids into our dying Toyota and drove them to my sister's house 40 minutes away. I told her I needed help with an emergency, and I would explain later. I told her to keep the kids home from school and not to let Meredith take them anywhere. My sister Rachel looked at my face and didn't ask questions. She just nodded and pulled my children into a hug and told me to do what I needed to do. I drove back home and started making phone calls. The first was to a divorce attorney named Veronica Huang, a partner at a family law firm downtown who had been recommended by a colleague at work. I explained the situation in broad strokes, enough for her to understand the urgency. She cleared her afternoon schedule. The second call was to a forensic accountant named Douglas Okafor, whose name I found through a desperate Google search for Financial Fraud Investigation Chicago. He had 23 years of experience and specialized in marital asset discovery. He could start reviewing documents immediately. The third call was to a locksmith who could change every lock in my house by noon. Veronica Huang had an office on the 43rd floor of a glass tower in the Loop, and she listened to my story with the practiced calm of someone who had heard worse. She was in her early 50s, silver-streaked hair pulled back severely, and she took notes on a yellow legal pad while I talked. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "What you're describing is financial abuse," she said. "It's also potentially fraud, depending on how the accounts were structured and what representations were made. The affair complicates things emotionally, but legally, it's less relevant than the money. Illinois is a no-fault divorce state, and adultery doesn't typically affect asset division. What matters is the dissipation of marital assets, the hidden accounts, the diversion of income. Those things we can work with." She explained the process in terms that made my head spin. Emergency motions, forensic accounting, discovery, temporary support orders. She told me the average timeline for a divorce like this was 18 months to 2 years, but contested cases with hidden assets could take longer. She quoted me a retainer of $15,000 and an estimated total cost of $50,000 to $75,000, depending on how hard Meredith fought. I signed the engagement letter and wrote a check from an account I had opened that morning, funded with the $5,000 I had intended to give my father. The money that was supposed to repay a debt was now going to fight the person who had stolen far more than that debt was worth. Douglas Okafor called me that afternoon with preliminary findings that made the morning's discoveries look like an appetizer. He had cross-referenced the documents I sent him with public records, corporate filings, and some database access he had through his professional network. The apartment in Lincoln Park wasn't just a love nest for Meredith and Graham. It was registered as the business address for a consulting LLC that Meredith had incorporated in 2021 without my knowledge. The LLC had received payments totaling $340,000 over the past 3 years from various corporate clients. Meredith had been running a side business, using skills and contacts from her main job and keeping every dollar for herself. The brokerage account I had found was just one piece of her hidden wealth. There was also a money market account in the LLC's name with $89,000 in it. There were assets being hidden in ways that would require subpoenas to fully uncover. Douglas estimated that the total amount Meredith had diverted or hidden was somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000, though he wouldn't know for certain until he could examine everything. "Your wife is very smart about money," he said, and there was a grim admiration in his voice. "She's also been very confident that you would never look closely enough to notice. That confidence is about to become her biggest problem." I confronted Meredith that evening when she came home from work. The kids were still at my sister's house, which she noticed immediately. She asked where they were with a sharpness that felt different than concern, more like a disruption to her plans. I told her they were safe. I told her to sit down. I told her I knew about the Chase account and the payments to my father and the apartment in Lincoln Park and Graham and the LLC and all of it, everything I had discovered in the past 36 hours. I watched her face cycle through expressions I had never seen before: surprise, calculation, anger, and finally a cold dismissal that made her look like a stranger wearing my wife's face. "You went through my things," she said, and I almost laughed at the audacity of that being her first response. "You've been stealing from me for 4 years," I said. "You've been lying to our children about why they can't have things. You've been living a whole separate life while I stayed home and believed we were struggling together." She stood up and smoothed her skirt and looked at me like I was a problem to be managed. "I was protecting this family," she said. "Everything I did was to build a future. You never would have agreed to the sacrifices I made. You never would have understood." I asked her what sacrifices she had made, exactly. She didn't answer. The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal maneuvering and emotional devastation. Veronica filed for emergency relief, requesting that the court freeze all of Meredith's hidden accounts and require full financial disclosure. Meredith retained her own attorney, a man named Philip Brandt, who had a reputation for aggressive tactics in high-asset divorces. He immediately filed a countermotion claiming that I had invaded Meredith's privacy, that the documents I obtained were inadmissible, that I was conducting a vindictive campaign against the mother of my children. The first court hearing happened 9 days after I confronted Meredith. Judge Eleanor Vance presided, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had been on the family court bench for 18 years. She listened to both sides present their arguments, reviewed the preliminary evidence, and issued a temporary order that made Meredith go pale. All accounts were frozen pending forensic review. Meredith was required to produce complete financial records going back 5 years. I was granted temporary primary custody of our children based on evidence of financial abuse and Meredith's apparent maintenance of a separate residence. As we left the courtroom, Meredith grabbed my arm in the hallway. "You're destroying everything," she hissed. "Everything we built." I pulled my arm free and kept walking, because I understood now that we hadn't built anything together. She had built something on top of me, using me as a foundation while constructing a completely different life. Graham turned out to be relevant after all, though not in the way I expected. He was a senior partner at Meredith's company, married himself, with 3 children, and a house in Winnetka that probably cost more than my entire divorce would. When Meredith's affair became part of the court record, it also became potential evidence in a workplace harassment investigation. Meredith had been receiving favorable performance reviews and significant bonuses from Graham for years, which raised questions about whether their relationship had influenced her compensation. The company's HR department got involved. Graham's wife got involved. Within a month, Graham had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation, and Meredith had been quietly terminated with a severance package that required her to sign an NDA about the circumstances of her departure. She lost her $145,000 salary. She lost her benefits. She lost her professional network and her reputation in an industry where everyone knew everyone. The life she had been building on the side was collapsing, and the life she had been neglecting, her actual family, was already gone. The forensic accounting took 3 months to complete, and the final report was 217 pages long. Douglas Okafor presented his findings at a deposition that lasted 7 hours, walking through every hidden account, every diverted dollar, every lie that Meredith had told over 4 years. The total amount of marital assets she had hidden or dissipated was $512,000. The total amount she had spent on the apartment, on travel with Graham, on personal luxuries while telling me we couldn't afford to fix the car was $178,000. The amount she had genuinely saved, in accounts that would be subject to equitable distribution, was $334,000. Judge Vance reviewed the report and issued a ruling that gave me the house, full custody of the children, and 65% of all marital assets including Meredith's hidden accounts. It was one of the most lopsided divorce settlements in the county that year, according to Veronica. Meredith was also ordered to pay my attorney fees and forensic accounting costs, an additional $93,000 that would come out of her share of the assets. She appealed, of course. Philip Brandt filed motion after motion, claiming bias and improper procedure and everything else he could think of. Every appeal was denied. The evidence was too clear, the deception too documented, the pattern of financial abuse too well established. The divorce was finalized 11 months after that conversation with my father. Meredith moved into a small apartment in a less desirable suburb, living off her severance and what remained of her hidden savings. She had visitation with the kids every other weekend, though she often canceled at the last minute, claiming work obligations that no longer existed. Eli and Sophia struggled at first, confused about why their family had broken apart, angry at both of us for reasons they couldn't articulate. I got them into therapy with a child psychologist named Dr. Maria Santos, who specialized in helping kids process parental separation. She met with them weekly and with me monthly, helping us rebuild something that felt stable. My father came to visit a few weeks after the divorce was final. He sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Meredith had once explained that we were too poor to afford basic necessities, and he apologized for not questioning the payments more carefully. He apologized for not calling me to verify. He blamed himself for trusting that everything was fine when nothing had been fine for years. I told him it wasn't his fault. The person who should have been trustworthy wasn't, and no one expects to audit their own child's marriage. We sat together in silence for a while, 2 men who had both been deceived by someone we loved. It's been 2 years since the divorce. Eli is 12 now, playing on the travel soccer team he couldn't join when Meredith controlled the money. Sophia is 10, taking art classes on Saturday mornings because she developed a passion for painting during the chaos of those early months. The house is paid off, thanks to the settlement. The car is new, or at least newer, a reliable Subaru that starts every time I turn the key. I've started dating again, cautiously, always watching for the signs I missed before. Control disguised as care, deception disguised as protection, confidence that looks like partnership but feels like a cage. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust anyone with my finances again, and my therapist says that's okay. Trust is earned, not owed. The people who deserve it will understand why I need proof. Meredith reached out once, about a year after everything was final. She sent a long email explaining her perspective, her reasons, her belief that she had been acting in the family's best interest. She said she had been trying to build security. She said I never would have agreed to her methods. She said she was sorry it ended the way it did, but she wasn't sorry for trying to protect us. I read the email 3 times, looking for any acknowledgement that she had stolen from me, lied to me, betrayed our marriage and our children for years. I didn't find it. I didn't respond. My father called me last month to say he was putting his house on the market. He's 80 now, ready to downsize, thinking about moving closer to Rachel and me so we can help him as he gets older. We talked about the house, about his plans, about the logistics of packing up 40 years of memories. Then he got quiet and said something that stuck with me. "You know," he said, "I used to worry that loaning you that money was a mistake. Not because I minded helping, but because I thought maybe it would come between us. That you'd feel guilty about it forever. That it would change our relationship." He paused, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. But it didn't come between us. It showed us who was really part of the family and who was just pretending. That $25,000 was the best money I ever spent, because it told you the truth. He was right. The truth had cost far more than $25,000 to fully uncover, in legal fees and forensic accountants, and years of my life spent believing a lie. But knowing the truth was worth every cent. I had a real relationship with my children now, one based on honesty rather than manufactured scarcity. I had a real relationship with my father, one where we could talk openly about money and mistakes and forgiveness. I had a real relationship with myself, one where I understood my own worth and refused to let anyone convince me otherwise. The woman who stole from me thought she was building a better future. Instead, she showed me exactly what my future needed to exclude. I still think about Meredith sometimes, usually late at night when the house is quiet and the kids are asleep. I wonder if she ever looks at her diminished life and understands how she got there. I wonder if she tells herself a story where she's the victim, where I overreacted, where the courts and the system and her vindictive ex-husband conspired to take everything from her. I suspect she does. People who deceive that thoroughly rarely have the self-awareness to recognize their own role in their downfall. But I don't spend much time on those thoughts anymore. I have a life to live, children to raise, a future to build on foundations that are actually real. The money Meredith hid is gone now, divided by court order, spent on attorneys and new beginnings. What remains is something she could never steal. The knowledge that I can trust my own judgment, that I can protect my family, that I can survive the worst betrayal someone can experience and come out stronger on the other side. She said no one would ever know what she had done. Now everyone does. She said I was too trusting, too oblivious, too easy to control. She was wrong about that too. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.